Oh, my word. Hello. I didn't expect to see you here. Me? Oh, I'm just looking for Susan. You know, Susan Foreman? From school? Yes, I looked up her name and followed her to where she lives. Hmm? No, I think that's quite normal behavior, don't you agree? The trouble is, I can't seem to find her house. All I found was this old junkyard and this police box. You know, I love these things. I'm sure they'll never be outdated, and if they are, I'm sure it'll take much longer than, 6 years from now. Are you familiar with the underground theme from Mario? Of course you are. Honestly, I'd be shocked if you weren't. I mean, this thing has been remixed and remade so many times over the years that it's kind of impossible to miss. And do you know why? It's because of its simplicity. It's one tune with no accompaniment playing three little flourishes. You kind of can't get any simpler than that. The original Doctor Who theme from 1963 is almost as simple. Just a bass line, a tune, and some spooky swooshes in the background. And for the exact same reason, it's just as recognizable. That's how it's been remixed in so many different ways. Now that's the thing, because of course neither of these tracks were made to be so simple for the purposes of being remixed. The underground music is simple because the NES just couldn't play very many sounds at once, but Doctor Who is simple for a different reason entirely. You see, it took until about the 70s, or the Third Doctor, for him to really become the hero of his own story. In the 60s he was quite different, and the show itself was very different as well. The film grain is so intrusive that it's sometimes quite hard to tell what's happening, and the pacing is so slow that there's just a lot of space to think. And the Doctor himself, rude and heartless.
Better on me.
What are you doing?
Well, I was going to get him to draw our way back to the TARDIS.
We've been too long as it is. Is the stretcher ready?
Yes.
This is the story that the 1963 titles were trying to encapsulate, and they did it with minimalism. Only having the bass and the tune in the music leaves a lot of space in the arrangement, and the fact that the tune is soaring way up here means that there's an uncomfortable gap between the bass and the tune. Lots of music will do this because it puts people on edge without them really knowing why. Seriously, look out for this technique. She seems to just not be here. Oh well, I suppose there's nothing to do except wait for her to come back. That is, if she does actually live here, of course. This really is a queer place. It's like from a television program. You know, I'm about 20 years old. That means I was born just a few years before the war ended. And so, in a way, I grew up at the same time as TV. We got it for the Queen's coronation, actually. I was only 10, so I begged my family to get one, so all the other children on my street could watch too. Actually, that was quite a trying time. I don't know quite exactly why I remember it in that way, but, well, it just seemed as though my face felt a little stretchier for a few weeks afterwards. The theme is in E minor, and it starts with a 1-3 vamp. The major 3 chord is very stable, so instead of creating any kind of tension and release in the first few bars, the music is content to just drift around. The bounding 6/8 time signature and the whooshing, sucking sound playing instead of drums make the music sound like waves crashing on a shore, the impact, and then a slow receding. Eventually, when the tune does begin, the bass changes to a more adventurous 1-4, and the tune swings wildly around, often jumping more than an octave at once. A B jumping 2 octaves to a C, before coming back down to rest on the B as if it's overshot, and then just as quickly jumping even further down from a D, 2 octaves and a half to an A, and coming back to rest on the B, all while avoiding the tonic E note. Next, the instrument playing the tune changes to a wistful chime and outlines an E chord, but still without playing the root note in the tune. It then outlines this B 4 more times in a row, almost like an echo. I want you to pay attention to this echo part, because it's probably the spookiest part of the piece, and so many other remixes in the future will put their own spin on it. In chiptune music, it's a very common technique for composers to add a bunch of sliding and vibrato to their tunes. And I often think about this as making the music more voice-like. Often, before programming a tune, I'll hum it to myself and try and match what I hummed as closely as possible, rather than just exactly recreating the tune in the original piece. The effect of this is hopefully that the tune will feel more human and slightly less like the performer is a robot. And for that reason, it strikes me that this tune couldn't sound less like it was being sung by a person. The massive leaps between notes and the gaps between the phrases make the tune sound less like a tune and more like a jumble of unrelated flourishes. This really makes it sound so much more alien and strange, especially because of its absolute refusal to play an E, the root note, instead choosing to always come to rest on the B, the fifth of the scale, which never sounds particularly dissonant, but never fully resolved either. It's like the tune is drifting around in a police box, unable to control where it'll end up next. The ending credits skip the quiet bass lead-in, so it has enough time to play a B section, which is almost as famous. Here, the song actually changes key from E minor to G major, which is the relative major. Every minor scale has a relative major, which uses all the same notes, except now a different note is the root. That means you can switch between them just by emphasizing different notes, making the transition incredibly smooth. But the music is now in a major key, so it sounds a lot brighter and more adventurous. It's like your head breaking the surface of the water. It starts on a B, which used to be the fifth, but it's now the major third, easing the transition between the keys and adding a new context for the tune to become brighter. It continues into what sounds a bit like a fanfare, with the very strong chords 1, 5, 1, with the melody walking down to the tonic G, followed by the chords 4, 1, 4, 1, with the 1 chords both being played under a 5 to 1 in the melody as well. It almost sounds triumphant, before solemnly hitting you with the B minor chord, doubling as the minor 3 in G, which is quite stable, but the minor 5 in E minor, pointing the way back home to the 1 chord and resolving back into the darkness, and reveals that it was never actually going to resolve to anything in the first place, as the G note echoes away mournfully. After this, the music loops back to the beginning and just kind of fades out once the titles are done. Well, I mean, the coronation is one thing. But do you want to know what I love watching the most? Science fiction. I mean, it might sound a bit far-fetched, but, well, they sent the first man into space just 2 years ago. In 6 years, they'll put a man on the moon, and after that point, well, the sky's the limit. Quite literally. In the 1980s, we could get our first taste of alien life. In 55 years, in 2018, we'll probably get around the Earth with rockets. In 2070, we'll control the Earth's weather from a moon base, and not long after, we'll be among the stars. I'm sure then we'll find out what aliens are really like. In 1967, there was a little added for the Second Doctor's titles, and then in 1970, for the Third Doctor, they actually created an ending. which is a haunting echo that fades into the rest of the episode, playing an E5/7 chord. It is the home chord, but that 7, the high note, still makes everything feel floaty, and not as resolved as it could have been. Anyway, this version continued, even through most of the Fourth Doctor, until 1980, when it was completely reimagined, turning the wistful droning of 1963 into something much more energetic, while still keeping the mystery of the original. I'll cover it in more depth in a second. This one played with basically no changes again through the Fifth Doctor and halfway through the Sixth Doctor, before Colin Baker got his own version of the tune for the 14-part serial Trial of a Time Lord, much more laid back, in 1986. After this, we got a new third song in 1987, which is the fourth version in total from Classic Who. This one played all the way through Sylvester McCoy's run, bringing a very weird energy, complete with late 80s CGI rocks and a surprisingly shiny, wooden TARDIS. This version very accurately reflected the tone of the show at the time, and so I think it's kind of fitting that, of all three classic remixes, this is the one that strayed the furthest from the original 1963 version. All three new tracks keep the same basic formula: bassline, tune, ornamentation. No chords, and not even any drums, really. Most of the differences in tone between them stem from their instrument choices. 1980 has an iconic aggressive bass lead-in, followed by an evolving shrill synth that sounds to me like a jet engine passing overhead. "1986, instead, has a very mellow combination of a soft bass and lead synth. And 87 just goes crazy, with this synth that sounds like it's trying way too hard, and that takes a bit too long to slide between notes. There's also the differences in how the pieces treat the fanfare B section. 86 plays it proudly, doubling the tune an octave lower. And 1980 changes the tone completely. After its dark and plodding A section, it plays the whole B section with a twinkly synth, not unlike Tom Baker's Twinkly Smile, or indeed the twinkling stars of the night sky full of wonder and waiting to be explored. 1987 does something completely different though. Every other version only plays the A section at the start, with the B section in the credits, but this one cuts out the lead-in, so it has enough time to play both the A and B sections together at the start, and so at 49 seconds, this one is the longest intro out of any other except the movie, by a long way. 1987's B section is played with what sounds like a marxophone, and compared to the other three classic tracks, this is the B section that sounds most at home with the rest of the song. Almost like the fun, jokey side of space travel is now much more in the centre of what the show is like, which of course is exactly what it was going for. The show eventually collapsed under its own weight in 1989, and that was the end of Doctor Who forever. The end. Well, except for the movie in 1996. The titles in this movie are deliberately a really big departure from its source material. For the first time, instead of only synths, we're hearing a full orchestra, with the tune being played by a trumpet and a violin and a glockenspiel. The most obvious change is the fact that they play the B section first. That's the part that sounds like a fanfare, and here it's clearly the intention to put it front and centre. I love this decision. It puts the heroic theme first, like the music is putting that at the start and saying, this is the new Doctor Who. He's cool and epic. He has a fanfare now. I suppose that if the movie had been successful, this would be the version we'd all know, and when we went back and watched Classic Who, we'd all think it was weird that the music was the wrong way around. Eventually, the music does go back to the original A section, where there's a slap bass synth, because I guess it's not forgetting its synthy roots, and for the first time, a drum set. There's also an interesting change to the tune. You remember how 1963 had those wide open gaps that made the tune kind of impossible to sing? Well, 1996 actually changes the notes themselves to close those gaps. It still goes from E flat to C, but the top note is moved down an octave, the bottom note is moved up an octave, and the note in between is moved, so it just simply steps down E flat, D flat, C. I guess this change was made to make the tune a bit more friendly and singable, but I guess it loses some of its character in the process. I don't know why, but I originally really hated how this version of the track sounded. I think it was too different. Now I've actually gone through the process of transcribing it though, I do kind of see what they were going for. And I also see why this attempt to revive the series didn't work. It's interesting though, that there were 2 attempts at a revival, despite the spectacular failure of the first one. So, I guess now it's time for the main event, the one you were all waiting to see, 2005. And I'm about to point out something you've probably never noticed before, at least I didn't. Listen. This bass line. It's the one from 1963. They've copied it. And then a bit later. Yep, that's the tune from 1963 as well. Except it's got like 15 layers of reverb added to it. I had literally never noticed this before. I'm so happy I'm making this video. Because yeah, this intro seems so modern, but it's really just adapting the same decisions that were made by Ron Grainer and Delia Derbyshire 42 years ago, but changing them into something completely brand new. The extreme gap between the low and the high notes that used to sound empty and ethereal have been filled in with stabbing strings, and some percussion has been added, this driving snare drum, which emphasizes quarter notes. The song is in 6/8, and so the rest of the music is emphasizing dotted quarter notes, so the snare being syncopated like this helps to drive the music forward even more. And because of this, the tune, the exact same tune that used to float spookily above the rest of the mix, now seems to scream above it. The same tune that used to jump around wildly between registers can now only be heard properly when it's playing some of its highest notes. This first note, before the tune begins, is just eaten by the rest of the mix, as well as the second 2 notes in this next phrase. So all 6 notes are being played, but we hear... And because of this, the echoing part really punches through as well, just because of how high it is. And since the second half of this phrase was so low, it's now content to just sound like one of those filler sound effects that sometimes get added, particularly in later intros in the classic era, which makes it sound even more like an echo. It's now fully leaning into the fact that it's the spookiest part of the tune. Now, in Modern Who, they've stopped playing the B section over the credits, which is a real shame. However, we still know what they sound like, because versions of all these tracks have been released with the B section included. Anyway, it seems as though this version of the B section is again leaning on the brass section of the orchestra, but it's still playing over the 1963 synth. I really like that. This new rebooted version of the show isn't trying to change anything drastic, just add on to what was already there, with a modern twist. These titles were just trying to do that, and I think they really succeeded. The next version of the intro was created for Series 4 and the specials in 2008 to sound more epic. This one is more of a rock version of 2005 than its own thing. It brings the iconic on the strings all the way back forward to the very start, and it leans much heavier on the brass section to play a lot of the chords. It even gets rid of the bass line from 1963, although it still includes the same tune. And there's also this bit in the middle. Yeah! That's how you know Series 4 means business! Then, in 2010, Matt Smith became the next Doctor, and he got a new intro to match. Watching everything in a row, the change in tone between Series 4 and 5 is quite drastic, really. If the 2005 titles were trying to stay true to the past, 2010 was trying its hardest to go in a new direction, and quite frankly, it goes hard. Before making this video, I never really listened to this intro before, but it's so much more refined. The bass at the start is much more techno-y and lively. We all love and respect 1963 for being made without computers, but there's no getting around the fact that 2010 really was made with them, and it's taking full advantage. There's a lot of reverb going on here. The bass synth is my favourite we've seen so far, and the tune is almost like handbells, but with a very clearly computer-generated feeling that I can't quite place. There's also a men's choir, which adds to the really moody bass layer. And in the visuals, I love how the TARDIS is flying through some kind of storm and getting hit by lightning, but even besides that, it looks like the current pilot is worse than every other TARDIS pilot we've seen in any other intro. Because, yeah, that's precisely how the 11th Doctor seems to fly a ship around. I bet he does it on purpose, the little fucker. And then there's this moment. This is the part that echoes that I was talking about earlier, and I said that it's normally the spookiest part of the piece. Except now, it's different. Each note has timpani drums accenting it. Just as the camera gets pulled down into this fiery area to reveal the Dr. D.W. Who text. I love this decision so much. Even in the much more bombastic 2008, the moment the titles were revealed wasn't particularly emphasized in the music, it just sort of drifted around. So it's so cool how everything works together here. And afterwards, it takes the echo to a whole new level. Now it echoes on low bells, high bells, brass, sound effect, lead-in, choir. If all of these count as echoes, and I think they do, that's 6 whole echoes. That's remarkable. And of course, this is Modern Who, so the B section is never played in the episodes. But there does seem to be an official version of it. And this one is also very new compared to 63. The way it passes the tune from the strings, to the synth, to the brass, then synth and woodwinds, before retreating back to the relative minor. It doesn't seem much like a fanfare anymore, to be honest, but it does create a really quite fun texture. I mean, it's like the 11th Doctor. This B section sounds like his fun, bubbly exterior, but it's surrounded by a real intensity, like the A section. Honestly, this track is much better than I remembered it being. They've remade this intro a few times for Matt Smith, but didn't really mess with the music, first making it all green, and then with this new abstract version for the second half of Series 7. The next one was for 2014 and the 12th Doctor. Now you might not have noticed this because it's quite subtle, but this one is time-themed. If you look closely, the clues are there. And in the music as well, there's actually a clock ticking sound, because of course there is. It could even be argued that these tubular bells are supposed to sound like clock chimes. Actually, there aren't many instruments playing. There's the tune and bass on synths, obviously, with brass filling in with some chords, but other than that, a lot of the substance of this track is filled in with sound effects. I've been trying to link these back to the personality of each Doctor, and to be honest, I do think the 12th Doctor likes showing off quite a lot, to be fair. As far as the visuals go here, it does look a bit like the ADHD version of Doctor Who, which I don't entirely hate. But I do like the fact that the classic picture of the Doctor that they've always included is now only a picture of his eyebrows. So, now it's 2018, and I'll be honest, there's not really much to talk about with this one, because it's mostly just a copy of 1963 again, but with some drums added. I guess it doesn't really add much itself except dubstep. I do like the visuals though. It looks like the visuals from the 60s if they'd had CGI. Unfortunately, I just don't really have much more to say about it. I mean, okay. I do like the more electronic direction that this new composer, Segun Akinola, was going for, and it feels very much like, with better material to work with, I can see this style of music really coming to define Doctor Who. As it happens, it's mostly just kind of nothingy. It's quite sad that Akinola wasn't kept on to maybe collaborate with the newest series, but there it is. And finally, 2024, we're up to date, and we're back to an orchestral arrangement. Although I think the most striking part of this one is the breaths in the background. Ugh, they're giving me sensory overload just listening to them with headphones. I'm sure they'll probably grow on me. It also got rid of the galloping, but it brings back the violin stabs. I suppose 2005 now counts as old Doctor Who, so we can just start referencing what it did now. I think the most striking part of this piece is probably the piano chords playing over the top. It's a fun new addition. I actually really can't tell if I have the right notes for these, so I'm sorry if I'm missing or adding any thirds or fifths. It's just so hard to tell. And the way that the B section has this really big finish. It's so showy. I wonder where I know that from. But then, with media like this, you can almost look the other way as well. You can watch them and they carry a certain quality about them. Like you're travelling back to the world that they were made in. How they spoke, how they acted, what kind of references they used, what the politics were like, what it was like to watch media from back then. It's almost like having a time machine of your own. I mean, even when we make things right now, we're communicating with the future. 61 years in the future, someone just my age will be able to look back and see what life was like for me. If the show goes on even longer, a 20-year-old 61 years after that will look back and see a world just as alien as Skaro. And when one show gets to span through all that time, that's more powerful than the Eye of Harmony. I suppose she's not coming back after all. I wonder where she could have got to. Do you want to come with me and look for her? I'm sure she's around here somewhere.